Was it a bit weird? You're on the other opposite side. It kind of sink in, for today that you kind of lost the election. We're in a very different new political era now.
It was very worrying, is the way I describe it, because I think exactly as Beth says, the Labour Party during the run-up to the general election made clear promises, particularly on tax, said people shouldn't worry about taxes going up left, right and centre. They then confected this black hole that the OBR has said they don't recognise. And then have come forward with the most extraordinary tax spending and borrowing plan, which is supposed to be all about growth. But actually what the tax has done, particularly national insurance for employers, has meant that we'll see unemployment going up, the OBR says, by 50,000. And of course, growth across the forecast, they're saying, will actually be less than it would have been under their forecast back in March.
Now,
so these are tricky times, I think, for the UK economy as a direct consequence of the decisions that this government has taken.
There's lots to unpick there. You say that they've confected a black hole. Now, I'm sure there is an argument to be had, a very genuine argument about the size of that black hole, whether it is £22 billion. But it is true to say that your spending projections were a fantasy, as described by the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And according to the OBR, they said that there was a £9.5 billion shortfall in your spending plans. So I'm not talking about the £22 billion figure, but you left a shortfall, a black hole.
So the IFS were very clear during the run-up to the election that the books were, as they said, wide open. In other words, Labour were very clear about the kind of challenges that lay ahead. On the figure of 22 billion, what the OBR have said is they don't, quote, can't legitimise that number and that black hole.
This is an interview that I did today with Mr. Hughes. I'm aware of what he said on the £22 billion. That's why I'm not talking about £22 billion. He said that there was a multi-billion pound shortfall. The IFS said that there was a fantasy spending projection.
Well, he said in respect to that, he said there was an amount of pressure on the departmental expenditure limits, as they're called, that there hadn't therefore been discussions around that with Treasury officials. He laid no blame, by the way, on ministers or the former Chancellor.
Would he?
And therefore, who knows what that may or may not have led to in terms of pressures within the public finances. But this idea of pressures within, in-year pressures within the public finances is nothing new, and they are regularly managed by government across Whitehall. And to the extent that there would have been some impact, that would have been how that would have been dealt with. The critical point still remains, however, that this government has come forward with eye-watering increases in taxation, 40 billion. I don't think we've seen anything like that in a number of generations, probably back to the 1970s and Dennis Healey, all predicated on the idea that this is going to boost growth, which is the way through a lot of the challenges going forward. Well, the figures just simply don't show that. The second thing is that they've fiddled with the fiscal rules, and yet even the margin above those rules, the so-called headroom that we often hear about, the OBR says is small in relation to the significant risks there are around their central forecast. Things like where does inflation go, where does productivity go, where does net migration go, etc. So there are big risks going forward here, and we're seeing some of that early stages in what's happening in the 10-year gilts.
You're right, of course, about the kind of, anemic growth projections, and of course, I think even Labour would accept, that there are sort of risks ahead. It's a difficult economic picture. But I guess the kind of overall thing that some people may be thinking and hurling at the TV right now is that it was you guys who left the public services in a mess, and yes, now Labour's had to raise taxes to fix it.
Look, we went through a very difficult time economically with COVID, which shrank the UK economy overnight by 10%. Then we had inflation imported due to the Ukraine-Russia war. We protected jobs through that period. That cost a lot of money, and we came out through the other side. We went into the last election with a very clear commitment, actually, to get taxes down. And part of the reason we were able to do that was we really addressed this issue, not so much of just spending money left, right and centre, but getting productivity up, which particularly across the public sector has been a problem.
It didn't go down well in the election, did it? Maybe
clearly there were many factors. There were many factors as to why we lost that election. But the other point I was going to make was welfare reform. So we went into that election with a very clear plan as to how we were going to save £12 billion in further welfare reforms. When I was Secretary of State, I'd already saved some billions of pounds around work capability assessments and getting the long-term sick and disability cohort benefits down. Further progress there is something where we would have grasped the nettle would have spared us a lot of this tax pain that this government is now inflicting on businesses and workers right up and down the country.
It was Rishi Sunak's last moment at the dispatch box. You, of course, ran to try and replace him as Conservative Party leader. Who are you backing now in the final two?
So I'm not going to go public on that. I've just taken that.
Just tell me. I won't tell anyone. It's fine.
Just between you and me. Okay.
Friends.
All right. Well, I ran myself, as you say. I then did publicly come out to endorse James Cleverly. But now all I'm saying is we have two great candidates. Whoever prevails and is announced as the winner on Saturday, I will row behind, and we will continue to hold this government to account.
So are you not backing anyone publicly because you hope both of them will make you Shadow Chancellor?
No, I've no idea what either of them has as an intention in that respect. No, I'm just going to wait to see what happens, and as I say, whoever wins this, I will support them completely.
OK, thank you very much indeed.